The first trailer for Robert Eggers' Werewulf dropped recently, and I've been waiting to get a proper look at the costumes, so let's break them down. Hi, my name is Maria or Mars, and I'm a historical reenactor and interpreter. I spend a lot of time in 13th and early 14th century clothing, so this movie is right up my alley. Robert Eggers has a pretty strong track record in historical horror, including The Witch, which is still one of my favourite movies, and Nosferatu. His next movie will be set in 13th century England, and the official website describes it as a harrowing tale of devotion, damnation, and the devil within. Ever since the first set photos came out, I've been dying to see more of the costumes, and now that the trailer's out, we've got a bit more to go on. So let's get into it. Two things in this shot stand out to me. Firstly, it looks like he's wearing a wool coat or tunic over a linen undertunic or shirt, and that is absolutely correct. Most people in the Middle Ages wore linen undergarments, which covered a lot more of the body than modern underwear. Why? Because linen is a very useful fiber. It's very tough, and it holds up to repeated washing in a way that wool and silk just don't. So, unlike wool and silk outer garments, linen undergarments could be changed out and washed regularly. The linen layers served to absorb sweat and oil from the body and keep outer garments clean. It provided a barrier between the skin and less comfortable outer garments, and it whipped away moisture. On the other hand, outer garments were usually made out of wool, although wealthier individuals might wear silk. Colored linen and linen outerwear are a bit controversial in reenactment, and I don't want to get into that now. What I will say is that the few references we have to linen outer garments in the Middle Ages are overwhelmingly Italian, and for a movie set in medieval England, I wouldn't really want to see linen outer garments. The second detail I picked up on here is the hand stitching. I noticed this in The Witch as well, and I'm really happy to see it. I think it shows a lot of care and attention to detail and historicity. Next up, we have what looks like a monk or a friar in a white habit. One thing that drives me a bit nuts in reenactment is the idea of a generic monk or a generic habit, because there was really no such thing. Habits varied by order, and you have to pick one. Judging from the fact that this guy is in all white, I want to say that he's a Carthusian, and that order did have a presence in medieval Britain. They were known for their asceticism even among other monastic orders. But the Carthusians were cloistered, and based off that and the state of him, I think he's got to be a ghost or a hallucination or something else spooky rather than a real literal monk. I feel like a creep because it took me several attempts to pause on this very short clip of a guy in his underpants, but they do look like real medieval underpants. Some of the set photos that came out a while ago had me a bit worried because they showed Aaron Taylor Johnson in a pair of black trousers, which would be a pretty major accuracy issue. Men in the 13th century didn't wear trousers. Instead, going back to that wool over linen principle, they wore fitted woolen hose which came out to the thigh over braids, which were basically big baggy linen shorts. I made a TikTok back when the set photos first popped up online, and a few people in my comments suggested that those might just be modern joggers to keep the actor warm between takes or in shots from the waist up. I am holding out hope that Werwulf will be a trouserless production, and this brief shot really gives me hope. We've got a shot of the whole main family and their costumes, which gives us a lot to break down. The parents and both of the older children are wearing very basic wool coats. Clothing in the 13th century was usually loose and unfitted, with the exception of hose, and pulled on over the head without fasteners or lacing. Interestingly enough, men and women wore the same basic outer garment during this period, with a few small differences. Men's coats were usually shorter, although length also varied by status. Men's coats also often had riding slits, which we don't see on women's dresses. It looks like the daughter's surcoat has a slit, which wouldn't be right for a girl, but it could also be a hand-me-down or something. Lily Rose Depp and both of the older children are also wearing sleeveless surcoats. While sleeveless surcoats were most iconically worn over mail, they were also part of civilian clothing and could be used as an extra warmth layer. This is a really minor nitpick, but on a woman, the belt should go under the surcoat. I find this really frustrating as a reenactor because I understand the desire to look snatched, but period art just doesn't show belts over surcoats on women. The only example I found of a woman with a belt over her surcoat is a Czech depiction of the Madonna from the 14th century. So if you're portraying a 13th century British woman, you're gonna have to be shaped like a traffic cone. I do really like that Aaron Taylor Johnson and his son are both wearing coifs. Head coverings weren't mandatory for men in the 13th century, but this style of coif is super common in manuscript images from the time. Medieval men's coifs are definitely goofy looking, and I love that this movie seems to be putting historicity and accuracy over what's glamorous or appealing from a modern point of view. They also get bonus points for the fact that the coifs aren't tied. Coifs in manuscript images are usually quite closely fitted to the head, like Aaron Taylor Johnson's is here, and that's something that a lot of reenactors get wrong. His son's coif doesn't fit quite as well, but also that's children's clothing, so there's a bit more leeway there. I really want a closer look at the belt fittings because I know Danegeld Historic Jewelry made a couple of pieces for this movie, as he did for Nosferatu and The Northman. If I were making a period piece, I could not think of a better jeweler to go to. George Easton does amazing work, and in fact we went to him for my engagement ring. I am wearing 3 of his rings today though, and my brooch is also Danegeld. I did get this ring for our first anniversary, so it's my substitute engagement ring for when I'm doing earlier period stuff. He's also only just started working again after thumb surgery, so on my behalf and on behalf of everyone behind the camera, I'd like to express our well wishes. On the topic of vendors that they used for this movie, my fiance and I clocked the Rush hat in this shot the first time we watched the trailer because it's everywhere in the UK reenactment scene. Crafty Beggars also shared a still from this movie on their Instagram, which confirms that this is the Bull Rush hat. Willem Dafoe is playing a hunter in this movie, and his character may be based on a real person.
I heard.
Robert Eggers stated in a recent interview that this movie is set around 1300 because, and I quote, "There was a knight and a hunter who was bidden by the king to kill all the wolves in England. That king was Edward I, also known as Longshanks or the Hammer of the Scots. He did in fact order that all the wolves in England be exterminated, and he hired Sir Peter Corbett as a wolf hunter. Supposedly, Sir Peter Corbett killed the last wolf in England in the Forest of Dean in 1290. He then went on to fight for Longshanks at the Battle of Falkirk in 1298. I will say that his personal heraldry was pretty cool, and I would have liked to see Willem Dafoe in that. Because he was at the Battle of Falkirk, I think we could plausibly put together an impression of him for reenactment, so maybe we will. I'm curious to see whether Willem Dafoe is playing the actual historical Sir Peter Corbett, or just a character based on him. His clothes definitely aren't fancy enough to be those of a baron. We got a look at this costume in the set photos, but here we have a bit more detail. Looking at the trailer, we can tell that the hat is a bicocket. The first known depiction of one of these hats comes from an English psalter dated to around 1201, so this hat is definitely within the dateline of this movie. The hood is pretty simple, and it's in line with what we see in manuscript images. It looks like there might be gores set in over the shoulder, and that's the construction that I favour as well. It looks like he might have a coifon under his bicocket, although it isn't tied as nicely as Aaron Taylor-Johnson's. That brings us up to 3 pieces of headwear in one outfit. We do actually see hats, hoods, and coifs stacked like this in images from the period. So, Willem Dafoe's hat maxing has my stamp of approval. Another thing that I didn't clock in the initial set photos is that he seems to be wearing a short-sleeved surcoat over his regular coat. This, again, is something that we see in art from the period, and it makes a nice practical warmth layer in line with his character. I'm very excited about Lily Rose Depp's headwear in this movie. Modesty standards around hair did change throughout the Middle Ages, but prior to the 14th century, and apart from a short trend for uncovered braids on elite women in the 12th century, most women did cover their hair. Even when uncovered hair came into fashion in the 14th century, it was braided and styled. So many films and TV shows will opt for loose hair, regardless of the period, because it's more in line with our current beauty standards and what we find appealing. I'm really excited to see a mainstream big studio movie commit to accuracy like this, especially on a glamorous A-list actress. The set photos do make it look a bit like she's got a separate wimple, and the 2-piece veil and wimple combo did come into fashion in the 13th century. However, based on the trailer, it looks like it's just one long veil wrapped around her head and neck. This style came into fashion well before the separate veil and wimple, but it was definitely still a thing in the 13th century. It also reminds me of the lower status women depicted in the Luttrell Psalter.
That rubbish is poetry.
This is what's called a gardecorps, a loose outer garment which came into fashion in the 13th century. They're often depicted on physicians and other educated men, as well as on travellers, and I assume Willem Dafoe's character falls into the latter group. It also might be my favourite outfit from the trailer so far. It's got big dramatic sleeves, pleated at the arm side with slits for the arms, like we see in 13th and 14th century depictions. The neckline is fastened with buttons, and although they really had their moment in the 14th century, they were starting to come in the 13th century. The one thing I'm sure a lot of reenactors in my audience are going to pick up on is the way the belts are tied. This knot thing is super popular in reenactment and Ren Fair and LARP, and it's coming to be known as a bit of a reenactorism, or a myth perpetuated by reenactors. I have come across a few examples of this belt knot from the High to Late Middle Ages, but I really had to cherry pick to justify it, and it definitely wasn't common. If you're a reenactor, I would probably avoid it. Another minor detail, but I really like how this dress is put together. Garments from this period usually had rectangular body pieces, with triangular inserts called gores to make the skirts flare out. They can be a little annoying to put into the front and back specifically, but they're super worth it. And I've done this on almost all of my 13th and early 14th century coats. Also, once again, we've got some lovely visible hand stitching. From what we've seen so far, I think the costumes in Werewulf are going to be pretty strong. With that said, a lot of reenactors online have had the same complaint: the lack of colour. A lot of media represents the Middle Ages as grey and brown, grimy and colourless, and that doesn't track with our current understanding of the period. For one thing, we know that people in the Middle Ages absolutely did wash and bathe and practice hygiene. The idea that everyone back then walked around dirty and gross is categorically a myth. A few quotes from that Robert Eggers interview have me worried. Medieval people also loved colour. We see that in artwork from the period, and we also see that in clothing. It's true that some dyes were more expensive than others, and darker and more saturated colours required multiple dye baths, which made them more expensive as well. The characters in this movie seem to be mostly lower status, so I wouldn't expect to see Aaron Taylor-Johnson in scarlet or purple. With that being said, plenty of colours like yellow and olive green were relatively affordable, and the idea of the Middle Ages as homogeneously drab does not reflect historical reality. I'm a bit scared to say this with reenactors behind the camera, but I don't mind the color palette so much for this movie. On the other hand, it seems like the costumers who worked on Werewulf understand the form and construction of medieval clothing far better than pretty much anything else I've seen on screen so far. Personally, I don't mind the color palette for this movie. I'm willing to accept it as a style choice as long as no one is wearing trousers. As a side note, Focus Features and Nosferatu partnered with Heretic Parfums when the movie came out. I'm really hoping for another perfume collab for this one, maybe something with incense notes. That's all I have for today, but I cannot wait to see more, and I'm very excited for the movie to come out. I'd also like to thank my first ever Patreon patrons. I've been setting up a Patreon, and it's live now, so if you'd like to see my videos early and without ads, or if you'd like to help us make more videos, you can find me there. Thank you as always for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.